Welcome to Punky's Pro Wrestling. The kid missing video is already up. And this is Dark Side of the Ring, Billy Jack Haynes. He came from Oregon, of course. He had gone up to Canada to work for Stu Hart. And Stu Hart threw him out. I don't know what was going on there. They didn't really go into detail about it. And he went back to being a gym rat in Oregon and Rip Oliver saw him and he became a star in Oregon in Don Owens' promotion. His name came from the movie Billy Jack, which I actually had heard at another time. And you know, he was actually, before his brain got scrambled, he was a really nice man. He didn't go out and party with the other wrestlers. He went and had pizza with the fans and their kids. So, he never let the fame go to his head, is what I gathered. 1986, Vince McMahon came calling. He did have a temper. He beat people up. Not women. Just people who would question the validity of the business, and he slapped Percy Pringle, aka Paul Bearer, across the face. I should say William Moody, aka Percival Percy Pringle III, aka Paul Bearer. That was close, cat. Almost watched a cat get hit. Because he was managing Rick Rude at the time, and Rick Rude messed up a finish. Well, my understanding is that Rick Rude wasn't very good when he started out. He was horrible. Jim Cornette talked about that, about them working with him and him not understanding the calls in the ring. Roddy Piper always said the 5 most dangerous words in professional wrestling: call it in the ring. And Billy actually initiated an interview with Dark Side of the Ring. His lawyer was there with him, so there were things he wasn't allowed to talk about that I think he would have talked about to his detriment. He OD'd on an airplane with the WWF, and that's when he was fired. Because he did have a problem with pain medication and I guess other narcotics. He tried to open a new promotion in Oregon to go against Don Owens, the OWF, the Oregon Wrestling Federation. It failed miserably, very quickly. They talked about him inserting himself in the Boys on the Tracks case, which is Kevin Ives and Don Henley. Now, That case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries. Mrs. Ives went to her grave believing that Billy Jack had witnessed the murders and had helped put the bodies on the track after they were dead. Now, it was interesting to me because a lot of people refute it by saying he was with the World Wrestling Federation in a different city that night. Nobody, including Meltzer, that was interviewed said that. Why wouldn't they have just given the proof to the production if he truly was in another city that night? That makes me wonder if he actually was there. Don't get me wrong, I think a lot of what he said is a giant pile, capital B, capital S. or as Judge Milian used to say, bovine excrement. Well, she said it once because she was reading a letter and somebody had written bull and she couldn't read it on TV. So she read it clinically and she read it bovine excrement. My mother and I belly laughed. It was so funny. But yeah, they could have, if it were true that he was in another city with the World Wrestling Federation, they could have very easily proven that what he said about that was bovine excrement, but they didn't. So that makes me wonder, especially Meltzer. Meltzer's ready to throw anybody under the bus. I don't really care for Meltzer, can you tell? I take everything he says with more than a grain of salt, about a heavy pinch of it. Sometimes he's right, sometimes he's wrong. I think more often than not, he's wrong. He does have inside information, so he does have some things correct, but yeah. And there's been questions, according to the Unsolved Mysteries, as to whether the boys were murdered. Now, the boys were murdered. They were beaten to death, and I guess that everybody pretty much agrees on that now, because that's what they said on the show. So, which is some form of justice, I guess. But let me try to explain. I've said this before, and I really don't want to blame the victims here because it's not their fault. But I do want to explain to you that these boys were breaking the law with parental permission. What do I mean by that? They were poaching. They were out at night with a spotlight hunting deer. That is poaching. That is against the law. You cannot go out at night, spotlight, and hunt deer. They were breaking the law. It's possible that they were killed by other poachers. And as I'm watching the Unsolved Mysteries, I'm saying to the TV, why aren't you mentioning the fact that they were poaching? You make it sound like it was legal what they were doing. And their parents full well knew what they were doing, because they let them take the gun and the spotlight and go out. Like I said, I am not saying in any way that they or their parents are responsible for what happened to them. I am just saying that they were breaking the law themselves. I don't know if they knew that, although I've been told ignorance of the law is not an excuse, but they may not have known that. Their parents may not have been aware that it was illegal to do that. Billy Jack said they ran across a drug deal, which was one of the theories posited on the Unsolved Mysteries. Billy Jack claimed to have been an enforcer and a courier for drugs. He got beat nearly to death at a car dealership owned by a crime family. And he said the beating was retribution for stealing money from them. Supposedly he had $1,200,000 and he took the $200,000 he felt was owed to him. And but a lot of people said they wouldn't have waited 14 years. I don't know. I think sometimes they're way more patient than you think, and they would get to you when you least expect it. I mean, I don't know. I don't know anything about that world, but just speculation on my part. That was in 2006. And they believe that organized crime was involved with backing his promotion. And a lot of the smaller promotions, they were saying back then when indies were first starting up, were backed by organized crime money for laundering it, making it clean behind a legitimate business. So, and by the way, the term laundering money, I learned this recently. It comes from the fact that a lot of organized crime people back in the day would open laundromats because laundromats are an all-cash business. And they could add their money, their ill-gotten gains, in with the laundromat money and say they got it at the laundromat and no one would be the wiser. And that's where the term laundering money came from, putting it through the laundromat. I found that interesting. And they would open up other legitimate businesses as well, like the car dealership or evidently independent wrestling promotions, different things like that. And that makes sense because an independent wrestling promotion and small outlaw leagues back then were not leagues. Listen to me, that's not what they're called. Small outlaw promotions back then were all cash business. So again, easy to say I made this at the wrestling show because it was an all cash business. So back then. It doesn't really work that way now. He ended up homeless. And he went to Florida to live with Rip Oliver when Rip Oliver was dying. Sounds to me like Rip Oliver had cancer because he was on the highest drugs. And Billy stole those drugs from him. Rip Oliver's son was on the show talking about it. Evidently, he was also a junkie, but Rip Oliver's son doesn't like him very much, and I understand why. I don't like his father very much, from what I could tell, but he had been friends with Jan. He went back to Oregon, and he had been friends with Jeanette, the woman that he married for quite a while, and her son died. They didn't say how or anything. I think they said mysteriously, which is weird. And after that, they grew closer and they got married. And she was a lot older than him. He's 70, she was 85. Billy is believed to have a brain injury not only from the beating in 2006, but just from his wrestling career in general. And his crazy YouTube videos are definitely proof of that. And he shot his wife to death. Evidently, he is claiming a mercy killing, and they must in some way believe that because they're only going for second-degree murder. They could go for first-degree premeditated murder. I mean, he shot his wife in their house, a defenseless 85-year-old woman. I mean, if they wanted to go whole hog, they could go first-degree murder, elder abuse, I mean, but they're not going crazy. They went for second degree, which means they may believe the mercy killing to some degree. Mercy killing defense to some degree, but his friend who's a lawyer and a journalist said, I would argue diminished capacity, which is, well, I agree. His trial is set to start in December of this year. So it'll go into next year. And I'll keep you updated the best I can on that. I do have a story that I'm working on for the channel. I'm gonna sit down tonight, take some notes, and get the story together. It just broke yesterday morning. And yesterday evening, Francine came on her Eyes Up Here podcast and talked about it. And I want to bring it to you. So, but it's a fast-breaking story, so I need to be able to sit down, take good notes. Excuse me. Next week will be the original Sheik, Ed Farhart, the uncle of Sabu. And Sabu will be on, I did see that. So, my job is to find articles, take notes of that case. That is, I mean, literally, the grand jury indictment was just handed down. There's going to be an arraignment. I thought if you had an indictment, you didn't need an arraignment. I didn't think you did both, but anyway. But I guess the arraignment is for him to plead or not plead in the case that just broke. In fact, Francine was makeupless and gorgeous. She had just washed off her makeup, was getting ready to sit down and watch a movie, and it popped up on her phone. So she called her co-host and said, we gotta make a video now. Make a cast now. So I'm gonna do some research because it's highly disturbing. It's concerning the arrest of Duke the Dumpster Drosy. So, I will see you for that probably tomorrow. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We'd like to get up to 30 by the 4th of July, 500 on Kid Missing, and 300 on Punky's World. Bye, guys.